Welcome to Rotting Jewels. My name is Dana. For new visitors, I have almost 2 years worth of what I refer to as active research on the topic we're going to discuss today on my YouTube channel, which will be linked in the description along with my link tree. We are going to continue a very long journey of challenging the public consumption narratives of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. You may have heard of them, or may know them under their modern-day iteration, the Best Friends Animal Society, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. In order to challenge the aforementioned public consumption narrative, as in the narrative spoon-fed to the public, we need an idea of how they came to be, what they believe, what they strike down as satanic panic conspiracy theories, and why they tried to distance themselves from the humble 37,700-acre animal sanctuary tucked away in what was once referred to as Little Hollywood in Kanab, Utah. We continue this journey by asking one question.
What is the process?
Oh, must we drag all that up again?
Is it old to the death? Better hold your breath. In the cell, I prevail. Freddy said from hell, ring the bell when you're finished. I'm a grown man and winning. Sacrifice it to the demons. Know I love it when you screaming. Commit to your thought. Do it now what you lost in the darkness. You will never wake up so conscious, anxious. Why are you so scared of feeling pain, bitch? Devil in your soul, cut it now and then you'll go. Walk on the dark path, kill and you feel that. Never in your life you gotta rush from the kickback. Mad blank, Glock 10, knock on the neck, man. Hear the whispering, devil taking over them. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair? Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair?
Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words, the Freddy telling.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
If you're just tuning in, welcome, and I'm happy to have you. The episode before this is necessary groundwork for what we're going to be talking about today.
Master, what is the process?
Don't ask me. They must be the other side of the spiritual regeneration gap.
Today, we will be continuing our exploration of the Bayou vibe surrounding the process when they were incorporated by Thomas Jude Baumler Jr. in New Orleans in 1967, and read the stark contrast to their legally stated purpose on their home turf, London. In order to do this, we have to discuss the wandering bishops, the witches, and the Discordians. This will not be an extensive history of these topics, but I'd like to provide enough context so that when we discuss the documented or rumored connections to the process, the possible implications of these relationships are clear. They're clear to me. Please know, I am not here to tell you what to believe. The truth is for you to decide. I see these implications as glaringly obvious, but I don't believe that I would if I didn't understand the surrounding scenes or process scenes. Sorry, that was a really bad joke. In the last episode, I did state that I have not read any of Peter Levenda's literature. This is still true as of this moment, and I have a book called The Mad Bishops, The Hunt for Earl England James and His Assassin Brethren by James Day, which we will be referencing pretty heavily in our discussion of the Episcopi Vagantes. I cannot recommend the book enough. The other sources I will cite throughout. Let's start with Timothy Wiley and Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. There had always been an accent in the process on a hierarchy of knowledge, of esoteric and exoteric, of what the IPs knew, inner processians, and what the OPs, outer processians, didn't. This sense of specialness grew over the years, and although we were absolutely dependent on the generosity of the general public, we tended to regard all those not associated with us with a detached cynicism. When we became a church, this tendency became more pronounced for those of us on the inside. From what I saw when I attended some of those meetings with the Omega, it was clear that the decision to become a church was stimulated primarily by a desire to avoid paying taxes. To do this, we had to formalize and thus freeze our theology. What had been a much more fluid, easygoing series of interlinked revelations became locked into place when we had to explain ourselves to the IRS. Our gods, with whom we previously considered as being more like archetypes than divinities, became set in stone as gods.
At one point in Stuhl, we were talking about the gods, and that so many of us were sort of sons or daughters of, or almost like genetically like these gods. Jehovah, on the one hand, being very immediate, very rule-oriented, but very emotional, angry, but with the core of love. And then Lucifer is said to be his exact opposite. Much more intellectual and much more to do with the future. So the idealists could be Lucifer. The Christ people would be certainly love, not necessarily warm-hearted love, but certainly acceptance love. Satan was described as having a high level as well as a low level, and his low level is what everybody thinks of. The high level was magic, literally magic, and extremely spiritual. Those would be the four main players.
Probably it's best to say that we went from psychological to psychic to spiritual.
Then we had to justify our official status by creating rituals, prayers, and celebrations, our word for the weekly church services. Ritual garments had to be designed, with tabards worn by the priest or priestess, a large and starkly red process symbol on the front.
It looked sort of like a church. It looked like something you might see in a Catholic church, but turned upside down.
Rooms in the various chapters needed to be prepared for the services, and overnight, we all became brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, with new names and new identities.
Then you move inside the community and the secrets start.
Who made up the gobbledygook that goes with the concept?
Gobbledygook.
It wasn't public knowledge. It was secret stuff.
Who made up the gobbledygook? Who made up the gobbledygook? The gobbledygook.
At the top, I would have thought that there was somebody who was evil.
Granted, some might have convinced themselves that these were gods to be worshipped, some might have pretended better than others, but I'm sure we all realized that suddenly becoming priests and priestesses meant we had to put on a good show for the public. Me speaking. There are so many discrepancies here with the narrative that Timothy Wiley is trying to weave. All that documentation that we read in episode 1, the company filings, now granted, it was a company, it wasn't tax exempt. I don't endorse the notion that these groups seek tax exemption status just to save money. I am of the opinion, based off of my research, that these groups seek religious tax exemption status so that they can claim religious persecution should they be investigated. I think a perfect example of this is the Children of God or the Family International, which the process fully endorsed even after all the terrible things that group did came out. But I don't want to digress too much. And again, anybody could have incorporated them. Why did it have to be Tommy Jude Baumler Jr.? Now let's get into the Episcopi Vagantes. Can you tell that I like saying it? Because this is such a conspiratorial topic, I would like to start with the most basic answer, Wikipedia. I know, but again, I think that these are fruitful exercises. In Christianity, in Episcopus Vagans, plural Episcopi Vagantes, Latin for wandering bishops or stray bishops, is a person consecrated in a clandestine or irregular way as a bishop outside the structures and canon law of the established churches. A person regularly consecrated but later excommunicated and not in communion with any generally recognized diocese, or a person who has in communion with them small groups that appear to exist solely for the bishop's sake. From Episcopus Vagans, the Historical Dictionary of Anglicanism, Colin Buchanan. According to Buchanan, the real rise of the problem happened in the 19th century in the wake of the Anglo-Catholic movement through mischievous activities of a tiny number of independently acting bishops. They exist worldwide, he writes, mostly without congregations and many in different stages of delusion and fantasy, not least in the episcopal titles they confer on themselves. From Independent Episcopal Churches and the Apostolic Succession, David Barrett. Barrett writes that leaders of some esoteric movements are also priests or bishops in small non-mainstream Christian churches. He explains this type of independent or autocephalous group has little in common with the church it developed from, the old Catholic Church, and even less in common with the Roman Catholic Church, but still claims its authority from apostolic succession. Okay, so we've got a bit of grounding here. It's a thing, and there's definitely a lot of weirdness with it. I want to read an excerpt from a book, The Other Catholics, Remaking America's Largest Religion, by Julie Byrne. There's a really interesting parallel with the Mad Bishops, and I think that the question she concludes with, and he concludes with, need to be at the forefront when looking at these so-called men of the cloth. Julie Byrne. Throughout the course of my research, I frequently read or heard from outsiders, and sometimes from insiders too, a list of charges, independents or illegitimate, disorderly, dim, and ego-driven, or even perverse, criminal, and insane. The more self-conscious independents arrange their affairs to ward off such criticisms. Others shrug off respectability and reclaim insults as points of pride. They play church because Catholicism could use more playfulness. They are thieves who have stolen a blessing, like Isaac's younger son Jacob. They are, indeed, the notorious Episcopi Vagantes of yore, wandering bishops who are wandering Catholicism into a bright new age. In the wider view, as scholars have often pointed out, similar accusations have been standard fare in religious polemics for millennia. Whether Christian versus Jew, Catholic versus Protestant, or Sunni versus Shia, the craziness and corruption of the religious other are constant themes. So, I do not want to make too much of independents' persecution or detractors' charges. Every group has its defamers. Every group also has its egomaniacs, abusers, and criminals. I get no sense that independent Catholicism is proportionally more slandered or riddled with malefactors than any other group. Is there any serious content in the charges? Sure. But obviously what counts as legitimate Catholicism, what counts as Catholic order, and even what counts as smart or sane to imagine for the faith are precisely the issues at stake among various Catholic churches. In this book, it is not my aim to endorse independence, whose various manifestations range from quite heavenly to very human, nor is it my intent to evaluate the Roman Church, the most important kind of Catholicism by far. Still, not all Catholics are Roman Catholics. As I narrate this other story, I do hope to make it harder for us to hear Catholicism without asking, what kind? And now from the Mad Bishops, James Day. As the war drew to a close in 1945, Earl James was in Edmonton, Alberta, renting a room at the Selkirk Hotel where he entertained Air Force officers and sought a relationship with a juvenile delinquent. Now James entered a new phase, one that would satiate his desire for fame and inflate his self-esteem while placing him in a new orbit of equally strange individuals. The small-time Anglican who dabbled in spiritualism and naturopathy was to become, at last, an ordained bishop, a prince of the church. But of what church? And who was his flock? What church indeed? There's a part of me that wants to turn this into like a 10-part series just on New Orleans because of the whole communism angle, and I say that with heavy air quotes, COINTELPRO, all these other weird religious organizations likely working for the FBI. I'm going to come back to these topics because I do think that they're important. In the Mad Bishops, James Day gives a full history of Catholicism in regards to this phenomena. I don't want to spend too much time reading through it, but I highly encourage people able to get the book. James Day. As we will see, for men otherwise ill-suited for such a vocation, like David Ferry, becoming a bishop was a fixation. From a theological standpoint, a valid ordination confers such men into the royal priesthood. One can say Mass with the power to turn bread and wine into the body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ in the Eucharist. One has the power to baptize, to marry, to give last rites to the dying. One has the power to forgive sins, and, most importantly, in this case, if one becomes a bishop, one has the power to create new priests and new bishops. In the last episode, in one of the Garrison files that I read, there was mention of Jack Martin. Reading from the Mad Bishops. Jack Martin was born Edward Stewart Suggs in Dallas about 1906. He was a Navy veteran of Pearl Harbor and loyal to the American Legion and VFW when out of service. He also worked in law enforcement. In 1952, Suggs was connected to a murder plot to blow up the sheriff of Houston. By then, he was wanted on a murder charge out of Dallas, a back alley abortion resulting in the woman's death, though that evidently was dropped. He was a slippery character. One didn't know quite what to think of him or what he said. When Suggs went to work for Bannister, he was under the alias Jack Stewart Martin, as in Bishop Jack Martin, a Freemason who sat in lodge with Carlos Marcello and Thomas Jude Baumler, another one of Bannister's investigators who later became the lawyer who incorporated the Process Church of the Final Judgment.
Aaron Cohn, one of the nation's most respected lawmen, says this regarding Carlos Marcello and the Kennedy assassination.
One of the toughest things to do in our society is to make people recognize that the old idea about anyone alleging guilt by association has to be waived when you start talking about the conspiracies of organized crime, because organized crime is crime by association.
Martin was heavily involved in independent Catholic Church affairs. Largely based on Martin's recommendations, Archbishop Carl Stanley consecrated David Ferry as bishop in the Old Catholic Church in November of 1961. Martin served as co-consecrator. At long last, David Ferry achieved the clerical role he long sought. However, the ceremony and honors were completely hollow, even if great pains were taken to authenticate the so-called apostolic lines of succession. The formal name of the church was the Église Catholique Apostolique Primitive d'Antioch Orthodoxe et de Tradition Syro-Byzantine, or the Primitive Catholic Syro-Byzantine Tradition. This is another revealing clue to the loyalties and ideologies that influenced both Carl Jerome Stanley and the New Orleans Cabal. Ultimately, the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy will reveal the extent of these influences on the church. Me talking. For those who are unaware, there is also some really weird ties to the assassination of RFK with the process that ties into Charles Manson. We're going to save that for another time. Back to James Day. The primitive Catholic Apostolic Orthodox Church of Antioch of the Syro-Byzantine tradition fell broadly under the umbrella of Christian Universalism, or the Universalist Church, and specifically was a faction of the Catholicate of the West, founded in 1944, which included Earl England James as Exarch of the Canadas. Its makeup was a constellation of individuals from different microchurches, the influence of its Universalist origins, but rooted in one common interest, occultism. Its first Catholicos, Hugh George de Wilmot Newman, was not invited to participate in Vatican II, while Stanley, as we pointed out, did receive an invitation. Wilmot Newman was consecrated by William Bernard Crowe. Both Crowe and Wilmot Newman established a correspondence with occultist Aleister Crowley. William Bernard Crowe was also an occultist, a priest in the liberal Catholic Church who composed a Mass of the Planets, and founded the Order of the Holy Wisdom, the purpose of which was to teach the Orthodox Catholic faith to occultists in their own vernacular. According to one of its flyers, the church incorporated the traditions of the Hindus, Kabbalists, Gnostics, Zoroastrians, Rosicrucians, Druids, Buddhists, and Sufis. Furthermore, the Order of Holy Wisdom considered itself an order within the Universal Church. The Universal Church seeks to reproduce as fully as possible within its own sphere for the benefit of its members and humanity in general, the deep spiritual experience enshrined in ritual and symbols. It is particularly concerned with cosmic symbolism. It endeavors to teach the doctrines and practices of the ancient wisdom religion, and to preserve such knowledge of value which has largely disappeared in the historical development of outer institutions. Being absolutely universal, that is, truly Orthodox and Catholic, it has access to the divine wisdom of Theosophy, embodied in the symbols of all nations. There is, of course, much to say about Aleister Crowley, but for our purposes it is important to note that he was the author of the Gnostic Mass, the semi-religious ritual for the Ordo Templi Orientis, Order of the Templars of the East, the Masonic sex magic cult Crowley oversaw in the early 20th century.
If you want to break out of the robotic conditioning imposed on you in childhood, you need some kind of dramatic technique. And Western occultism is one of the more dramatic techniques of busting out of conditioned consciousness to become aware of the many levels of reality that you can perceive if you're not trapped in one particular reality tunnel. Parsons understood Crowley very well, and other American scientists who suffered as much misrepresentation or just plain being ignored by the mass media. Timothy Leary also understood the importance of Crowley. Leary's work is very much in the same tradition as Crowley and Parsons. You do certain things and you observe the result, and you see what conclusions you can obtain from that. Crowley, Parsons, and Leary both used consciousness-altering drugs to a great extent. That is considered the major crime in modern America.
Crowley's various communes were purportedly laden with drug use, and while he never claimed to perform a black mass, Crowley was deeply familiar with its proceedings. Crowley's own definition of a black mass is as follows. The celebrant must be a priest, for the whole idea of the practice is to profane the sacrament of the Eucharist. Therefore, you must believe in the truth of the cult and the efficacy of its ritual. A renegade priest gathers about him a congregation of sensation hunters and religious fanatics. Then, only can the ceremonies of profanation be extended black magical effect.
Bury me in a nameless grave. I came from God, the world to save. I brought them wisdom from above, worship and liberty and love. They slew me, for I did disparage therefore religion, law, and marriage. So be my grave without a name, that earth may swallow up my shame.
The ceremony is a parody of the Orthodox Mass with blasphemous interpolations. The priest must be careful, however, to consecrate the host in the Orthodox manner. The wine has been adulterated with magical drugs like deadly nightshade and vervain, but the priest must convert it into the blood of Christ. The dreadful basis of the Mass is that the bread and wine have imprisoned the deity. Then, they are subjected to terrible profanations. That Crowley emerges as a link is both startling and unsurprising. When Perry Russo, D.A. Jim Garrison's chief witness in the Clay Shaw conspiracy trial, talked about David Ferry performing private masses in makeshift vestments, we are no longer inclined to as easily dismiss such behavior as idiosyncratic, but rather as perpetuating the occultic practices of his spiritual forebears. Peter Levenda elaborates, the Black Mass, which Ferry was accused of performing, is a ritual that mocks those of the Catholic Church. Essentially, it is an attempt at organized blasphemy, an attack of rebellion, political as well as theological. It is also designed to attract demonic influences, evil spirits, and the souls of the angry dead. Yet this ritual carries very little weight if performed by a layperson. It is potentially quite powerful, however, if performed by an ordained priest.
At one stage, I took part as a witness to a Black Mass.
We staged a Black Mass in the building.
The chalices, the candles, the mirror. The chalice was full of some black substance. We didn't know what it was. It was all right out of a Dennis Wheatley novel.
Here we were, all kind of dressed up, and one of the women showed up in a black bikini.
The priestess who's laying out on a slab in front of us and stripped, and then the priest in his dark robes bends over and kisses her all over the place.
She's lying on a table, and there was some suggestion of something, I don't know, was this sexual or cannibalistic or what?
As a piece of theatre, it was rather good.
I do know that some people were shocked and scared out of their minds.
Deliberately made people scream. Fear, anger, all of that.
I think the point a lot of people missed was that it was a very cool piece of religious satire. It was really Dada meets Aleister Crowley.
Now I have technically read some of Peter Levenda's literature, even though it's being cited by James Day. So here we have, even though the timelines are different, communication with Aleister Crowley, just as L. Ron Hubbard.
He could simply say, I have action. A magician, the magic cults of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries in the Middle East were fascinating. The only modern work that has anything to do with them is trifle wild in spots, but it's fascinating work in itself, and that's work written by Aleister Crowley, the late Aleister Crowley, my very good friend. And he did himself a splendid piece of aesthetics built around those magic cults. It's very interesting reading to get a hold of a copy of a book, quite rare, but it can be obtained, The Master Therion, Therin, The Master Therion by Aleister Crowley. He signs himself The Beast, the mark of the beast, 666.
Because there's always the weird Scientology angle going on in the background. It is worth noting that Jim Braden, or Eugene Hale Brading, who's also tied into the JFK conspiracy, is named in some of the Guardian's office documents that were acquired by the FBI during Operation Snow White, citing him as a Scientologist. And Ed Sanders has a file. It's very difficult to read because his handwriting is like chicken scratch, but he received 2 leads from individuals tied into the JFK conspiracy that David Ferry was involved with the process. James Day lists some of the Bannister investigators that were ordained to the bishopric by Jack Martin, including Guy Bannister. James Day writes, Bannister was suspended from the New Orleans Police Department for allegedly pulling his gun on a bartender during a fight of Mardi Gras of 1957. Bannister had been drinking. When he was demoted from assistant superintendent, Bannister refused the lower job offered to him and was duly fired in June of 1957. He became president and publisher of a weekly newspaper, the West Bank Herald, writing a short-lived column, Behind the Scenes with Guy Bannister, mostly fire and brimstone pieces on communism. The address for his investigative firm, Guy Bannister Associates, was 434 Balter Building. Bluford Balter was a co-owner of the West Bank Herald, and he was also one of the heads of the New Orleans American Nazi Party. It was not uncommon for Klansmen, Minutemen, white citizens, council members, and other fascist sympathizers coming and going out of the Balter Building, making it the center of radical right-wing activity in New Orleans in the 1950s and 60s. In late 1961, Ferry, Arcacha Smith, Bannister, and Omnipotent members participated in seizing munitions from Schlumberger Well Service in Houma, Louisiana. According to Eric Tagg, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy himself not only knew of the raid, but authorized it. The munitions purportedly came from the French right-wing terrorist group OAS, anti-de Gaulle militants angry over the Algerian independence from France, which JFK supported. RFK wanted those munitions seized to prevent further OAS attacks, or for use by Castro forces, or further south in Guatemala. Tagg writes, Jack Martin and Dave Lewis noted in their affidavit that Robert Kennedy had established his own secret channel of communication to communicate with Bannister, bypassing J. Edgar Hoover and the local FBI special agent in charge. Moreover, as described earlier, the confluence of these groups in the same building, whose owner, Bluford Balter, was a Nazi financier, was its sympathies to Nazi ideology, characterized by the inherent racism and anti-Semitism of Bannister and his associates. Jeffrey Caulfield noted, David Ferry was, perhaps, the first Nazi in Lee Harvey Oswald's life. Jim Garrison also obtained a transcript of a letter from Ferry wherein he shared his dream of the reunification of Germany and living in a world where all the currency was in Deutschmarks. Furthermore, it spoke of the need to kill all the Kennedys and Martin Luther King Jr. Ferry wrote that he was being suffocated by and Jews. The letter was sent to Garrison by Glenn Pinchback, who worked in the mailroom of the Operations Command at Fort Sill outside Lawton, Oklahoma. Pinchback described the letter as a neo-Nazi plot to enslave America in the name of anti-communism and a neo-Nazi plot, gargantuan in scope.
6 months before the assassination, Oswald had taken a mundane job with the Riley Coffee Company, but it seems his real activities were centered a few blocks away. From a small office on the corner of Lafayette and Camp Street, Oswald managed a local chapter of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Operating from an adjoining office was a sinister figure named Guy Bannister.
About Guy Bannister, it's difficult to say much about him because he always stood in the shadows and pushed someone else to the front. He was a strongly disciplined man, perhaps the outgrowth of his many years as a special agent in charge of the Chicago office of the FBI. But he was a key man in the assassination. And that's clear from the fact that Oswald's sheep dipping, his being portrayed as a communist, was done out of Guy Bannister's office. So he was sheep dipped for months as a communist by giving literature. Lee, hand this out today. This is your assignment. I came across the fact that Oswald, a private in the Marines, had taken a Russian examination. And I knew the privates did not take Russian examinations unless they were connected with intelligence. So that caused me to be curious about 544 Camp, which was the address stamped on one circular that they gave out one time before, obviously, Bannister told him, Lee, no more addresses. It turned out that was a side address of Guy Bannister's private detective agency. Well, I went down there to look at it, and I found myself not merely outside of Guy Bannister's office, but across the street from Naval Intelligence, across the street from Secret Service. Around the corner was the Crescent City garage, the garage for the intelligence community. And then 2 doors away, the Riley Coffee Company. I used to be in the FBI. I knew people in Naval Intelligence, and they were either across the street, around the corner. The whole intelligence community was there, and right in the middle of it was Guy Bannister.
One has to wonder if the New Orleans FBI hijacking of wandering bishops wasn't just part of a COINTELPRO or Operation Chaos type situation. And people are still writing about it today, so I'm not going to sit here and continue because, again, the JFK situation is a black hole that I have no interest diving into anytime soon. The other wandering bishops implicated in Garrison's investigation, especially those under Universal Life Church, will be discussed in another episode. I really wanted to include the details about some of these individuals and their ties to fascist or right-wing parties, because the process does espouse this type of ideology despite their claims to the contrary. Touching back on the Étoile Polaire Lodge, the Times-Picayune, June 23, 1969. Masonic leader warns of mixed values. Thomas B. McIntosh Sr., a local Masonic leader, said there are people who have developed new philosophies on life based on what he termed controversial points of view. Things are either consistent or inconsistent, expedient or inexpedient, profitable or unprofitable. But no one inquires if a thing is right or wrong. At a time like this, it may be well to inquire just what place and what function Masonry has in the world today. He said, there is enough manpower within the fraternity of some 4 million American men and many millions throughout the world to change the entire complexion of the world. We are now being told by the Students for a Democratic Society and other un-American organizations carrying on college campuses, disturbing our educational institutes and houses of worship, that this kind of government, which we thought was our right, must be changed. If this is the way it is to be, then think of the useless sacrifices of our forefathers. Our Masonic ancestors gave us this system of government, and America prospered far beyond the dreams of those who gave it birth.
That
Timothy Wiley doesn't wax poetic too much about New Orleans, but let's see what he had to say. The chapter we started on Royal Street, right in the middle of New Orleans' French Quarter, although well placed for street traffic, soon became too small to cope with the numbers that were being drawn to us. Young Americans were joining, men and women, many of whom were hippies who wanted more structure in their lives. Others were musicians drawn by our songs and chants. There were a few junkies who needed a firm hand to quit. I recall throwing away a young woman's works, a glass syringe in a neat little box, in front of her, much to her horror. It wouldn't have worked in most cases, but to her credit, she kicked heroin and enlisted with us in selling process magazines on the street. Me speaking. We're going to see later on that the process gets federal funding for rehabilitation, even though they are not licensed to do so, not only in the United States with a direct tie to the late Henry Kissinger, but also in Canada.
First time in decades, he emerges from the shadows. Grim shadows that have cast a pall over a man with a frightening secret, a terrible boast.
I wanted to shoot him. I wanted to assassinate him very much.
You have just seen and heard a man called Kerry Thornley, who used the exotic background of New Orleans as his headquarters for a deranged plot to assassinate President John F. Kennedy. His one regret, his good friend and Marine buddy Lee Harvey Oswald got there before him.
Now, for a somewhat brief history of the Discordians, from J.C. Greer, Discordianism, the Dictionary of Contemporary Esotericism. Established between 1958 and 59, the Discordian Society was a collaborative project initiated by two high school students from the LA suburbs, Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley. It wasn't until after this pair relocated to the French Quarter of New Orleans in the early 60s that they formalized the doctrines of their religious fellowship. In short, these doctrines reject the concepts of order and disorder as illusions projected onto chaos, which Discordians glorify as the counter-entropic life force. Instead of associating chaos with conflict or violence, members of the society regard it as the natural order of the universe and honored it as synonymous with the Far Eastern principle of the Tao. This formerly scholastic society of roughly a dozen members, though, turned militant after its leading figures discovered psychedelicism, the esoteric doctrine of sacramental theology famously evangelized by Timothy Leary.
Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country, and word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The integration of LSD into Discordian beliefs led to Operation Mindfuck, a decentralized program of clandestine cultural subversion that continues to the present day. Their scheme was designed to counter the U.S. government's programmatic persecution of psychedelicists.
Could you talk a little bit about an idea I've heard attributed to you called Operation Mindfuck? It sounds like a counter-propaganda technique similar to H.G. Wells' radio hoax.
Operation Mindfuck is a form of guerrilla ontology. It's a group effort involving many people, and it is an attempt to galvanize the minds of many readers and television viewers and moviegoers to suddenly see the world in a new way. And membership in Operation Mindfuck is not secret. It's just once you understand what Operation Mindfuck is, if you are a writer or a director or otherwise involved in the entertainment, literature, theater game, you just automatically become a member if you're sympathetic to it, and Operation Mindfuck rolls merrily along. And since it is no centralized conspiracy, nobody can ever stop it because there's nobody giving the orders. It's the only purely anarchist movement in the arts today. And it's very easy to recognize the members. You'll find 23s popping up in their works. You'll find references to the oncoming Yin Revolution, the Aquarian conspiracy, space travel, and there's an old Italian proverb, when four sit down to conspire, three of them are fools and the fourth is a government agent.
And so I don't believe, and I believe with modern surveillance techniques, that's more true than ever. And any overt action against the power structure is doomed to failure because of the techniques of control that have been developed. But the anarchistic impulses of art cannot be governed. I think more and more of the culture shapers are becoming part of Operation Mindfuck, and the whole world is having its mind fucked. And I'm very happy that I can play a humble part in this noble endeavor.
As to the Society's categorization as neo-pagan, it is true that its founders adopted the Greek goddess of discord, Eris, as their patron deity. However, the fact that her veneration is largely farcical, not to mention the Society's overriding investment in non-violent guerrilla warfare, sets them apart from reconstructed paganism. The initial stimulus for Operation Mindfuck was the Garrison investigation of 1968. As District Attorney of New Orleans, Jim Garrison organized his own independent inquiry of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and, over the course of his highly publicized probe, the investigation team concluded that Thornley and the Discordians were part of a CIA-led conspiracy to kill the president. Moreover, the Discordians, Garrison alleged, framed Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone gunman. Garrison's theory hinged on the fact that Oswald and Thornley served in the Marines together, and, incredibly, the Discordian patriarch wrote a novel about the alleged sniper 3 years before the assassination. In response to the allegation, Thornley's fellowship inundated the DA's office with bizarre and imposing communiques signed by the Bavarian Illuminati. Here, the Discordians were exploiting the fact that Alan Chapman, a member of Garrison's investigation team, believed that this shadowy group were likewise involved in the assassination. Operation Mindfuck did not stop there. The scope of the Discordian counterintelligence campaign expanded as members of the Society, many of whom were journalists, inserted pieces about the Illuminati into mainstream media sources as well as the underground press. The Discordian Illuminati thesis offered a dualistic cosmological picture in which the fate of the world hung in the balance between the sinister forces of the Illuminati, backed by the ancient ones of H.P. Lovecraft's horror fiction, and the Discordian Society, here portrayed as an ancient religious order of mystical anarchists. Much to the delight of the Discordian Society, their Illuminati narrative gained traction within the psychedelicist uprising, which, by the final years of the 1960s, was reaching its apogee across the U.S. The most well-known connection regarding the process and Discordians is Barbara Reed, from Adam Gorightly's Historia Discordia. Early Discordian Barbara Reed was a familiar figure in New Orleans bohemia of the 1960s. Known in the French Quarter as Mother Witch, she was an avid voodoo practitioner, claiming to have learned the craft from an Orleanian Creole who was a spiritual descendant of Marie Laveau. According to Reed, she was the only Caucasian to whom this knowledge was passed on. Reed was one of the first members of the New Orleans branch of the Discordian Society, claiming, at one time or another, to be the reincarnation of Goddess Eris herself. Whatever the case, Reed certainly brought a high degree of chaos into Carrie Thornley's life during the Jim Garrison investigation period, when she placed Carrie in the company of Lee Oswald in September of 1963, a couple months before JFK's assassination. According to Discordian Society co-founder Greg Hill, Barbara Reed was an aspiring politician, pot dealer, and former lover of Jim Garrison. When Barbara ran for city council in '64, Garrison was absolutely against it, and, she told me, repeatedly warned her to stop playing around where she might get hurt, and that, of course, made her all the more anxious to run. In correspondence with this author, Carrie Thornley wrote that he first encountered the Process Church in New Orleans in February 1968, when I was there to testify, reluctantly, to the grand jury. Barbara Reed, the principal witness against me, and a friend of mine, was said to be up to her ass in the process, which indeed maintained a coffee house half a block from Barbara's apartment. I went over there with Slim Brooks and saw pamphlets about Satan on war and Lucifer on war and Jehovah on war.
And vow upon the life of your God that has given you, upon the beauty of the world in which he set you, vow to make war on war, and in my name, the name of Lucifer, the bringer of light, the bestower of joy, set your seal upon the vow. I, Lucifer, proclaim the end.
Which I found confusing, because I thought Satan and Lucifer were both the same guy. Until then, of course. A bunch of pale, thin zombies were sitting around in this place. I was telling very funny Garrison stories, but nobody was laughing. Me speaking. That last reference is, from my research, the most commonly referred to connection, but there is another file tucked away in the JFK archives, which feels a little less Operation Mindfucky, excuse my French. It's signed to Bud, unsure if this is Fensterwald, with the initials HW, possibly Harold Weisberg. December 11th, 1971. Dear Bud, Read the Process, 1205 Royal Street, New Orleans. When I was there, I regarded the most likely useful sources as Barbara Reed and Bob Head and or Darlene, his wife. Both seemed to have been swallowed up. Nobody was at Barbara's, which seemed empty. Her phone was answered by a not-in-service disconnect. I went to the Ursuline Street address when Bob and Darlene had lived and found a night spot there now. No phone listed in either name. But the NOLA Express was being sold still in the streets of the quarter, only none of the vendors admitted knowing where Bob and Darlene lived now. The phone had been in her name. He goes on to discuss the Blavatsky Foundation as well as the programming of Sirhan, and he includes a humorous little caveat about the process. If the process has any kind of symbol, I'd like to know. Such people might use it as the device for hypnosis. See the Billiken Courier and the Copenhagen case. Me speaking. What the reliability of these individuals are, I don't know. I have my opinions about Carrie Thornley and the Discordians in general, but I think it's safe to say that it's probably pretty likely that they were hanging out with the process. So, while I said they were in Baumler's office in the spring of 1967, a lot can happen in 6 to 8 months, especially when you're surrounded by ONI, Discordians, Hell's Angels, dentists, Discordians who hang out with Hell's Angels and dentists, that'll be its own episode, wandering bishops who may or may not be hypnotists, in the only U.S. state that operates under Napoleonic law.
I took my troubles down to Madame Rue. You know that gypsy with the gold cap too. She's got a pad down on Pettiford and Vine, selling little bottles of love potion number 9. I told her that I was a flop with chicks. I've been this way since 1956. She looked at my palm and she made a magic sign. She said, what you need is love potion number 9. She bent down and turned around and gave me a wink. She said, I'm gonna make it up right here in the sink. It smelled like turpentine and looked like Indian ink. I held my nose, I closed my eyes, I took a drink. I didn't know if it was day or night. I started kissing everything inside. But when I kissed the cop down on 34th and Vine, he broke my little bottle of love potion number 9. I held my nose, I closed my eyes, I took a drink. I didn't know if it was day or night. I started kissing everything inside. But when I kissed that cop down at 34th and Vine, he broke my little bottle of love potion number 9. Love potion number 9. Love potion number 9. Love potion number 9.
And now for the December 11th, 1967 filing. It's long, it's wordy, and, according to Timothy Wiley, a product of Thomas Jude Baumler Jr.'s fevered imagination, and, according to Bainbridge, reminiscent of a Catholic-like structure to secure government approval. I say Mary Ann's death, which we'll talk about at the end, answers any questions that I used to have. It reads, Objects and Purposes. This incorporation is to establish the process, Church of the Final Judgment, which has been called into existence by God to be made known to all men that the latter days are upon us. Forever now, the Lord Christ is in the world, and gods walk amongst men, and there are signs and wonders foretold in prophecy in preparation for the final judgment of men. This incorporation is organized to be operated exclusively as a non-profit religious institution for the administration of assets, funds, and/or property, real, personal, or mixed, so same may be devoted or channeled to religious and charitable purposes, and all legitimate phases of activity that flow from this high calling, which it may desire to engage in for the benefit of mankind in the areas of education, teaching, charity, spiritual, and occult research, and for the well-being of persons attending, administering, or connected with such institutions or its divisions that it may operate, sponsor, or come associated with from time to time. No part of the net earnings or other assets of this corporation shall inure to benefit any private individual, and this corporation shall never carry on propaganda or otherwise attempt to influence legislation. Me speaking. I just want to point out this is wildly inaccurate considering the lobbying power that Best Friends has. Its primary function shall be 1. To maintain, own, and operate institutions of spiritual learning on all levels, and in these institutions of attainment to teach all branches of the academic arts and sciences as well as the occult arts, to instruct the young of the Americas in all branches of science and the occult mysteries, and in every phase of the arts as traditionally understood in education, and in those new areas of the arts and sciences which may come into existence, and to provide for the spiritual, physical, moral training and health of all who teach in, administer, or attend these institutions. 2. To engage in research of an academic and scientific nature in all phases of the material and non-material universe. To own and operate research facilities and institutions of all natures and descriptions, and to enjoy the right of employing trained personnel in these areas of research, and to grant certificates and degrees of obtainment for those persons who attend the aforesaid institutions in their various special areas of endeavor, and to publish the results of this research and own and operate facilities in all medias for the publication and dissemination of the knowledge gained. 3. The foresaid church shall have as one of its purposes the power to receive grants from other foundations and persons to expedite spiritual and occult research in all areas of discovery, as well as power to issue stipends, grants, and fellowships for research and study of the same. It shall be possessed with the power to publish and make known to the world at large and the academic, scientific, and spiritual community the discoveries that are made through its facilities in the areas of science and of the arts and in the occult and magical arts, and to dispose by sale, lease, or other contractual arrangements of the fruits of its labor in order to finance its further research in the areas of humanities and occult exploration. 4. Philanthropic causes of all nature and description shall be one of the purposes and objectives for which the aforesaid church shall exist, and the church shall be able, under the powers vested in it by this charter, to dominate and set aside funds for philanthropic causes of worth as decided by its High Council and other dignitaries. And in this connection, the Pontiff and the High Council may grant to individuals and groups of meritorious cause special funds, stipends, allocations of resources, grants, and fellowships in order that the purposes of this corporation might be fostered, as well as other areas of a general academic, scientific, and occult and spiritual nature might be sponsored. 5. The aforesaid church has for its object and purposes to operate its own media for printed matter such as typesetting equipment, printing presses and equipment, and to own and maintain its own delivery and circulation system and facilities, and all such other equipment and materials necessary to expedite its own publishing of newspapers and other literature, and or its distribution and circulation through either private and or public means, such as by mail or by other forms of delivery, so that the knowledge it has gained through its research facilities, educational institutions, scientific endeavors, and objectives of its philanthropic and religious goals might be disseminated and made known to the public. Me speaking. I'm not going to read through the remaining 10 pages of this document because it is basically breaking down the hierarchy of the church, the internal structure. For those who are familiar with the process and their inner structures, this document is starkly different from what they present to the public. I'm just going to name off a couple of things in here that set off red flags. And when I say red flags, it's because they are so different from the acolytes, messengers, disciples, and such. They have the holy office of the prelate. The orders are angel, archangel, throne, principality, dominion, power, Seraphim and Seraphim. They have abbots and priores, a synod of prelates, order of Levite, the order of brother, brother master, brother minor, master of the order, the office of the doorkeeper, order of mother, sister major, sister minor. And the most important thing in this document, in my personal opinion, is the creation of a quorum, the high-ranking processians, and the requirement of aforementioned processians to meet in New Orleans from all four corners of the Americas when one of the leaders passes away. One has to ask if the obituary from Leland Cole, talking about long live Hecate, as the processians stepped over bodies of people pleading for their life to save the animals, wasn't completely inaccurate. I'd like to close out with a response from Leland Cole to someone refuting his obituary post. December 1st, 2006, re-obituary Marianne. Grand Spook replies, Dear Joan of Albany, I think you have forgotten something. The writer Alan W. Watts once said that the human brain has a device known as the forgettery, a device so powerful that it can reconstruct memory or even fully eliminate it. So then, let us both remember the way things really were. If we are part of humanity, identified with humanity, in sympathy with humanity, we are doomed. If we attempt to save humanity from its doom, we shall fail, because humanity has chosen its doom, and has shown its unwillingness to reverse its choice. Our only valid course of action is to detach from humanity, climb out of the quagmire of its lies, its hypocrisy, its blind desire for its own destruction, find our own truth, and create our own destiny. Robert de Grimston. So, Joan of Albany, step over human bodies indeed. That is exactly what happened, and why not? For the way things were, remain the way things are. Humanity is the devil. Long live Hecate and her animals.
You thought the leaden winter would bring you down forever, but you rode upon a steamer to the violence of the sun. And the colors of the sea find your eyes with trembling mermaids, and you touch the distant beaches with tales of brave Ulysses, how his naked ears were tortured by the sirens sweetly singing, for the sparkling waves are calling you to kiss their white lace lips. And you see a girl's brown body dancing through the turquoise, and her footprints make you follow where the sky loves the sea. And when your fingers find her, she drowns you in her body, carving deep blue ripples in the tissues of your mind. Tiny purple fishes run laughing through your fingers, and you want to take her with you to the hard land of the winter. Her name is Aphrodite, and she rides a crimson shell, and you know you cannot leave her, for you touch the distant sands with tales of brave Ulysses, how his naked ears were tortured by the sirens sweetly singing. Tiny purple fishes run laughing through your fingers, and you want to take her with you to the hard land of the winter.